A little look back over the year and an early Christmas present for the future. Hello and welcome. Alan Plum here again with a little more from Shed Engineering. Now it's been a while since I posted anything, I'm sorry about that, but I'm afraid I've been a little bit busy with work, or the jobs have been strenuous and have knocked me for six, and it just feels as if I've been busy. Then, like most folks, we've had the runny nose, sniffles, and a head that feels as if it's exploding. And then, of course, we're trying to keep up with the domestic chores as well. Time just seems to fly by, and Christmas has crept up on me all too quickly. Where has the year gone, I ask myself. And here are just a few clips from the past videos. I'm afraid I'm not big on Christmas in actual fact. I think it's become far too commercialised, and the true message of giving and sharing is fast being lost. Most of us who've grown up in a country based on Christian values, and if you take even the simplest Christian values of love thy neighbour, do unto others as you would be done by, etc., even them simple values seem lost when you watch the news. It seems like a world full of greed, corruption and killing, and even simple traditions of Christmas like the kids learning the message of Christmas and the giving and sharing is even being lost as hundreds of schools drop the nativity play. And even the Lord's Prayer the other week was banned in cinemas, all because it might offend some people. I'm afraid I'm starting to think, what is the world coming to? If a nativity play can be deemed lightly, or could possibly offend or upset some people, then you start to think, how long will it be before Christmas is also deemed as a celebration that also might offend some people? But nevertheless, the message of giving and sharing, and that's not just at Christmas, I don't think has been totally lost. In actual fact, I think everyone posting a video is actually trying to give and share something. And I, for one, appreciate everyone's contribution. Because, let's face it, you get to see and learn so much. Whether it's hiking through and up the Derbyshire or Somerset hills, holidays abroad and different places across the country and world. You can see virtually every preserved railway and steam gala without any travel expense, without aching muscles, without waiting half an hour between trains in the pouring rain with damp trousers up to your knees from trampling through the long grass to try and get the best shots. People are giving their thoughts, ideas, skills and techniques, giving and passing on their experience absolutely free, and that should never be taken for granted and their efforts forgotten. So anyone contributing gets my thanks and appreciation. But even if you believe, like I do, that the best things in life are not things, and you try your best not to be materialistic, you still have to admit it's still nice to get a real present. And even more so if it's something you have wanted for a long, long time. Think back, what's the best ever present you ever had? The one you remember to this day. Well, for me, I think it was a Mammoth steam engine and lots of Meccano gears and cogs. I used to love my Meccano and made all sorts of things, even though a lot of it was second hand and pass-me-down stuff. And I made all sorts, bridges and cranes and little cars and so on and so forth. But when I got my little oscillating steam engine, I was absolutely over the moon. And I went on to build many versions of a steam-driven lorry. And the final versions ended up with a 10-speed gearbox six-wheel drive, like a Scammell type tractor unit, and it actually pulled me along on a trailer, albeit for about 5 or 6 inches. Well, a few weeks back I got given an even better present than that. Something I had thought about for many years, but money and lack of workshop space always kept it as a pipe dream, and something that was just not meant to be, until I got this message under one of my videos. Cool, that's typical. I've just gone to the video I thought the message was under, and I can't find it anywhere. I've looked under dozens of others and still can't find it. Perhaps the gentleman has since removed it. But anyway, it just said something like, Hi Alan, I have a small mini lathe that I don't use. You can have it free if you can collect. I live in Accrington. Dave. Well, I was absolutely gobsmacked. Honestly, I can hardly put into words how I felt at reading that simple message. I actually read it over and over, as simple as it was. I just read it over and over in disbelief. I checked again and again that it was under one of my videos, and I even come out of YouTube and then went back into it, uh, just to make absolutely sure. And there was the same message. I have a lathe that I don't use. You can have it free. I mean, even the smallest mini lathe that Machine Mart do, the little yellow one, I think is around £500 or £600, and I just couldn't get my head around such kind generosity. Let's face it, if you want to sell something nowadays, it's not that difficult. The days of putting a postcard in a shop window or an advert in the local paper are long gone with the likes of eBay, etc., which makes selling something pretty easy and getting your money back on something that's so expensive. As I say, I was just totally overwhelmed at this chap's generosity. Uh, I kept thinking, why me? Out of all the possible people, out of all the thousands of engineering, metalworking, and workshop how-to sort of videos, um, and the thousands of chaps doing all manner of wonderful things out there, and yet this total stranger had come across one of my videos. He mentioned the one where I'd got the N-gauge tractor going across the fields, but out of all those ways he could have passed on the lathe, out of hundreds, if not thousands of options, he chose to give it to me. And I just found that, as I say, just overwhelming, touching, and totally heartwarming. So after, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, I obviously go to reply, and guess what? There is no reply button under uh, his comment to open the dialog box. So panic starts to set in then, because how many people actually use their private messaging service on YouTube? It's a bugger to find sometimes. But anyway, I left a message in my email, and bless his heart, the next day he got back to me. And it turns out not to be one of the smallest lathe that I was thinking about, but more or less the biggest of the mini lathes, if that makes sense. For anybody who knows about them, it's a Clark 430. 430 between centres and something up to around 230 or 9 or 10 inches in diameter that you can turn. And while in proper model engineering terms it's only classed as the most basic of lathes, it's still a huge piece of kit and weighs in at around 125 kilos. That's like almost two blokes. And very expensive. Oh, to me it's very expensive. To buy one new is about £850 mark. Okay, it's second hand, but Dave said he had only made one small steam engine with it, then decided to get one a bit bigger with a gearbox rather than changing the belts all the time. I said he'd got to accept something for it, and I would scrape some money together, but he insisted he didn't want anything and said, "If you try that, first we'll be arguing, and then you'll be taking home the drill stand as well." Anyway, a couple of weeks later I went up to Accrington, found his place all right. He was a smashing chap. Dave, his wife, and two lads made me more than welcome, gave me a full rundown on the lathe, and showed me what was what. Then he showed me the horizontal steam engine he'd made with it, and it was a stunning piece of engineering, honestly. Now, in many ways, it's easy to get or buy machinery or a lathe. That's actually the easy bit. It's the skill in using tools and machinery that's the hard part that needs to be fully appreciated. And honestly, for this engine to be Dave's first model, with no engineering experience in his background, he was a plasterer in actual fact, then it was all the more remarkable, as I hope you can see from these photos. So this is his first engine, and then we see a beam engine which he's just finishing. Anyway, he showed me his workshop, which is upstairs in the small bedroom, and how it's still upstairs I have no idea. In theory it should be on the ground floor in pieces. Because he's got his bigger lathe, a milling machine, a mechanical hacksaw, two drill stands, grinders, all his tools and stock, benches. Must be an incredible weight. That was an eye-opener in itself. Now between them they'd already got the lathe downstairs onto a trolley. How they did that I've got no idea. So getting it to the front door wasn't too bad. But even with four of us, it was a real struggle to take the weight and get it out of the door and down the step. It's got integral handles that pull out, but you need room for the width of the lathe and then a bloke stood either side. Well, that's almost impossible, even through a normal doorway, and I could see that getting it into my shed at home was going to be a major problem. But we finally managed to get it into the van and screwed down. Honestly, with the weight of it, if it had started sliding on a roundabout, it would have taken the van door clean off. I had managed to give Dave's wife a handful of money on the quiet, but somewhere along the line a much better drill stand suddenly appeared from somewhere and was also put aboard. We had another brew, and I tried my best to get across how over the moon I was and give some kind of adequate thank you. But how can you give an adequate thank you for such a generous gesture as this? So I say we had a brew before leaving on our 170-mile ride back home. The lads at the fabrication shop Ames, Mark, Andy and Thomas, had all volunteered to come and give me a hand and a lift with it into the shed, but having just experienced the weight and struggle to get it into the van, then there was no way four blokes would have room to be alongside the lathe while we got over the threshold through the narrow door, making a 90-degree turn, then squeezing and turning again between the benches. So I had to come up with a cunning plan. Well, the plan got off to a pretty bad start. As I slid it out of the van and down a ladder, it started raining. That's why this first part is pretty poorly documented. And by the time I'd got it the 15 yards down the side of the bungalow, The move was totally abandoned after building an overnight shelter because it was raining so much. The idea of the MDF worked well. That had been bolted to the van floor, so I had something to screw blocks to all around the lathe. The slide out of the van went okay with some oil on the ladder, and once the weight of the lathe was down towards ground level, the other end of the ladder was a manageable weight to lower down onto waiting rollers. And apart from the rain, she came down the side of the house nicely on the flat and even concrete. And even across the back, the ladder was plenty stiff enough. You just had to take your time and not rush. So the Cunning plan was working so far, but that had been the easy part. We now had to start gaining some height. So the idea was to take the back rollers out and allow it to pivot in the middle somewhere, letting the front end come up onto the bigger diameter fire extinguisher. But somewhere along the line there was a slight miscalculation, and the back end of the ladder was actually scraping on the ground for a few inches. But we soon managed to get a lever forward, gaining height to clear the threshold. And with the weight being at the front, I had the leverage to be able to lift the back end of the ladder and put bigger rollers underneath, allowing her to roll forward onto a waiting bigger diameter gas bottle, and that was then giving me the height to get up the step into the shed. Now we had to turn 90 degrees as you see it there, but the ladder was actually too long for that, so the MDF had to slide off the ladder and turn onto the waiting slipway or track made from my metal steps and timber battens. Just on the very right you can see the railway layout, and just behind the camera on this left hand wall is my workbench, hence why I thought it too tight for 4 chaps to get through that kind of opening. For the rest of the journey she needed thin aluminium tubes under the MDF to act as rollers, so the slipway battens were just 5mm lower to allow for the rollers to go underneath. She was binding on the corner, but with a bit of persuasion and considering the weight and tight working area, then the Cunning plan soon had her rolling into the shed. Well, inching it into the shed might be a more honest description. And that left the ladder free to bring into the shed, and using the rollers she was transferred onto the ladder so we could start the main lift to bench height. That's all I blooming well need. Obviously I'm just uploading footage ready for editing, and it looks as if my camera's gone up the creek and totally pear-shaped. Excuse me while I find the bleep facility. Beep 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 beep. With the lathe at this end of the ladder, it was easy to lift the other end, and so that was lifted, packed up. The lathe was slid to the other end. I was able to lift this end and pack that up. The lathe was moved back and this end was lifted. The lathe was moved back and this end was lifted, screwing all the packing pieces together as I went to keep this stable, and gradually got it up to bench height. The lathe went back and forth perhaps 15 or 20 times. And with this kind of weight on a narrow ladder, you have to check and double check everything, even before the smallest move, and eliminate even the smallest risk. You don't see many of them, but honestly, I have got diagonal struts screwed in all over the place, and G-clamp braces onto cupboards and benches, so that the ladder is secure in all directions at all times. Never start to think that will do or that should be alright. It only takes the smallest of mistakes, and in a millisecond the whole thing could come crashing down. Just watch as I take these blocks out and accidentally knock the ladder. See? That tiniest of mistakes could have terrible consequences. The lathe might actually survive, but your legs wouldn't if you were anywhere close. So if you're doing anything like this, please take it slowly and safely. That's why what you've seen up to now has taken me about 5 hours. Now in a moment you will see that I'm putting the lathe onto my homemade router table, which I know is exactly the same height as the bench on the back wall. So providing the rollers will let us slide sideways, which is quite an experiment, but it actually works quite well, I can add some reinforcement to the bench over at the back, and then when I'm ready, simply wheel the lathe over and slide it into position. But I had made one huge blunder. Having never had a lathe, it just never dawned on me that it needs to be at least 6 inches lower than the average bench. And in my case, being such a short person, more like 8 inches lower. Well, honestly, after planning every single step, working out how I could do this on my own, I was gutted and frankly quite embarrassed. But at least she was safe and sound while I hatched another even more cunning plan, which was looking like needing a crane. But who on earth builds a crane to lift 125 kilos? As you can see, the aluminium tubes still cut down a lot of the friction and let us slide sideways very nicely. I cut down the other table. Mark at Ames welded some braces around the bottom, and I reinforced the top and folded a drip tray up from Fomalux plastic, which can be heated and bent. But first I had to lift the lathe to get the MDF out.
Hope you
Sodding camera. Anyway, my fiendishly cunning plan to build a crane had one major design flaw. It could only lift or lower the lathe a couple of inches. So the now chopped down table had to be chalked up so I could roll the lathe across. And in actual fact that worked very well. I could then lower the table back down just using a crowbar to remove the blocks. The crane, if you can call it that, again used the ladder to give me the leverage, and behind the lathe against the wall there is a 10-inch wide plank of mahogany. That's got 3x2 T-bars top and bottom, and the end of the ladder sits on that, and both are tied with wire right through the wall. The lathe is roped at one main point, but battens then spread the weight over 3 or 4 rungs, and the other end of the ladder can then be crowbarred up and chocked up on a secure frame in small increments, taking the weight and then actually lifting the lathe clear of the bench. At last, some footage that's working. In actual fact, I must have re-roped or re-slung the lathe 5 or 6 times before I got this perfect level lift. which I really needed so that when it was lowered, it sat down without moving the drip tray out of line. I had to make a couple of tiny adjustments, and I know I'm no expert, but that's looking pretty damned accurate to me. So many thanks to Steve at Ames for the loan of the gauge. And I'm still having trouble finding the words to get across my appreciation for the huge kindness and incredible generosity of Dave up in Accrington. I'm now the proud custodian of a smashing lathe. It might only be classed as a very basic model by many, but when you've been dreaming of making a proper hot air engine or steam engine for many years, then honestly, it's worth its weight in gold. I just hope I can follow in Dave's footsteps and learn the skills that he's learnt himself to start building some working models. I can't actually promise making anything quite as beautiful as this, because this is just first-class workmanship and attention to detail that's still almost a dream away. But I can guarantee I will have hours and hours of fun and satisfaction tinkering away and trying my best. I'm also the proud custodian of a lovely drill stand thanks to you, Dave, and it's far better quality than the one I had. And I have passed on my drill stand on to Malk of Lincoln, who is also trying to build a working steam engine, and has even melted down cans to cast the flywheel. So because of Dave's generosity up in Accrington, his kindness is also touching others, and that seems like a perfect message and note to end on. Christmas came early for me this year, the greatest present anyone could hope for, the gift of kindness from a total stranger. I hope you found something interesting, and as always, many thanks for watching.